and purchasing hierarchies, the maintenance mechanics and the buyer could deal with each other directly. This immediately improved communication, reduced paper travel, and speeded up the ordering process. Of course, this is a very simple example. Let's take a much more complex business process example to demonstrate the effect moving up and down these functional stovepipes has on process speed. Let's take a look at the new product development process in the automobile industry. Typically, it takes 5 years to develop a new car in the United States. Analyze why the new product introduction process takes so long, and you undoubtedly find that a significant amount of the lost time, the waste in the process, is attributable to those functional stovepipes. Time is lost sending memos, conducting meetings, performing unnecessary administrative functions, and analyzing and sending reports and information up and down the vertical organization stovepipes for decisions. In the development of the Ford Taurus, Ford brought all the disciplines together and did the whole process simultaneously. The marketing and sales people work right along with the research and design people who work together with the manufacturing, purchasing, and service people. They now have a formal name for this cross-functional process approach to new product introduction. It's called concurrent engineering. We also read these days about the term re-engineering, which also refers to process innovation and redesign. The Taurus new product development team focused their attention to common goals of customer needs and product manufacturability and serviceability requirements right from the start of the development effort. Marketing, research, and design and manufacturing, purchasing, and service experts were located together and worked the design and development process simultaneously. They were not constrained by traditional department functionalism. The process focus was the key here. The concurrent engineering team tore down the functional department walls. I believe that it is not an accident that the Ford Taurus was introduced in record time, or that development costs for the car were significantly under the planned budget, and that the Ford Taurus is now the best-selling car in America, winning high praise for its design and quality. In the case of new product development and the other critical processes in our businesses, the answer is quite clear. We need to tear down the functional walls, move away from the obsolete thinking of traditional stovepipe functional organizations. We need to look at the flow of information and then organize people in multifunctional, horizontal, process-oriented teams versus the traditional vertical functional stovepipes. As we break down the functional stovepipes, we need also to break down our excessive bureaucratic organization structures. As we shift from functional stovepipes to multifunctional, horizontal, process-focused teams, support staff should be integrated into the direct areas doing the actual work. As we do this, we will have the opportunity to reduce the number of layers of management in our businesses, establish increased ratios of non-managers to managers, and wider spans of control at the organization's front line. In the United States today, studies of average spans of control show that there typically is a ratio of 1 manager to every 10 workers. In the future, we should be looking at much wider spans of control at the organization's front line, more like 1 manager for every 25 to 75 workers. Excessive structure slows down organizations. I believe that no more than 5 layers of management are necessary, regardless of firm size, from the president to the worker on the front line. Many large businesses will successfully operate in the future with no more than 3 levels of management. Good ideas are typically roadblocked, delayed, analyzed to death, or revised beyond recognition or usefulness by the hierarchies at most large businesses and at an increasing number of smaller businesses. The answer is to have better but fewer managers and move the organization to self-managing teams. What is a self-managing team? Again, much confusion surrounds this term. Any 2 managers will give you very different interpretations of what a self-managing team is. From my experience, a self-managing team is a group of people empowered to arrange its own schedules, set its own goals, control its own budget, control hiring and firing, order its own material, and justify and order necessary equipment. A self-managing team interfaces with its customers, improves quality, and in advanced cases actually develops long-range strategy. I have seen self-managing teams composed of people with different skills and from different functions break down bureaucratic obstacles, management roadblocks, and break through the walls separating different functions to get a job done. What makes self-managing teams so controversial is that they ultimately force managers to do what they never dreamed they could do. They force managers to give up control, because when self-managing teams are working right, they actually manage themselves. In other words, no boss is required. The most important thing to understand about self-managing teams is that creating, organizing, and coaching them is a long, hard process. Carrying out a conversion to self-managing teams can be very difficult, which leads me to my next speed guideline. We must develop bold, trusting leaders. To involve employees requires a significant culture change in our businesses. The success of the culture change is dependent upon strong leadership. Leadership must have the intensity of purpose to achieve just-in-time objectives, and the energy and perseverance to follow through and stay on course. With just-in-time, the role of the leader changes from an emphasis on control and administration to one of helping and coaching workers to do their jobs better by eliminating constraints. We first need to understand the key differences between a manager and a leader. A manager focuses on controls, administration, and relies heavily on system and structure. A leader relies most on people and focuses on change and innovation. Leaders trust workers to do the job without a lot of supervision, controls, and approvals. It is virtually impossible to create fast, real-time decision-making if you don't trust people. We have to understand that our workers are a source of untapped knowledge. We cannot allow them to leave their brains at the gate when they enter work each morning. One of leadership's key new responsibilities is about coping with change. Leaders must actively lead change programs to remove the many constraints to higher speeds in our businesses. It is ironic that many of these constraints are the same controls, administrative procedures, and organization structures that many of these same managers spent their careers building. The problem is that we have too many people in leadership positions who are very comfortable being mere administrators and problem reporters. We have few who are aggressive change agents, problem solvers, and innovators. Leaders need to eliminate the bureaucratic rules and cumbersome paperwork which leads me to my next speed guideline. Keep all business procedures simple. I believe many businesses are being strangled with endless memos, bureaucratic forms, and paperwork. And now, thanks to our latest innovation in communications technology, endless electronic mail messages. Do not get me wrong. There is an important place for each of these forms of communication. But I believe we need more face-to-face, on-the-spot action and decision-making. In the engineering group I just took over, I have been fascinated to observe the number of memos, forms, and electronic mail messages that the engineers send to each other within the group and with groups they interface with. Since coming on board, I have been encouraging them to stop spending so much time sending messages to each other and learn to talk to each other more. To their amazement, they are rediscovering that in many cases it is far easier, simpler, and more efficient to just get off their desk, talk to each other, and make decisions on the spot versus sending formal messages that must be read, interpreted, and formally responded to. Excessive rules, regulation, and paperwork are too common in most of our businesses. All policies and procedures over 2 pages long should be questioned. When they are longer than 2 pages, they probably need to be simplified. Particularly government and public organizations, because of their many years of existence and large size, very often tend to protect and justify many habitual procedures and bureaucratic forms, not realizing that simplicity will make things easier for everyone, internally and externally, allowing with the same resources for the allocation of efforts to enhance and extend their services and product. I do believe there is a strong role for formal documented procedures. All critical business processes should be documented in writing to assure that inputs to the process are understood, value-added activities are understood, and process outputs are understood. The process documentation should be clearly written and understandable and define the critical measurements and control points. The best procedures use visual aids and flowcharts extensively. One of my recent positions was an effort to lead the ISO 9000 certification effort for my company. For those of you not aware of what ISO 9000 is, it is a new quality system standard that is rapidly becoming the model for any business that desires to compete internationally. In other words, long range, if you want to compete in the international market, you will most likely be bringing your quality system to compliance to the ISO 9000 quality system standard. Some of you may already be working on the ISO quality standard as I speak. One of the things ISO requires is that you must document the critical processes in your business. Things like how you perform contract review, how you perform design functions, manufacturing, purchasing, and service must be documented in writing. I found through this process that clear, understandable procedures can be a big benefit to a company. The best procedures we created are visual, making extensive use of flowcharts or other visual aids, and the supporting text is short and to the point. This particular flowchart describes a process to respond to customer problems. On one page, it describes the cross-functional information flow and the measurement points. Once we have streamlined our processes and eliminated the wasteful rules, our written procedures should clearly describe the remaining necessary controls and approvals. Bureaucratic rules, controls, and approvals must be eliminated. Procedures should continually be examined for cost effectiveness. As we progress on our just-in-time process to eliminate waste, we need to ingrain these new ideas into our company's culture. We can aid and accelerate this process by formally documenting in written procedures what works and what is cost effective. It is very difficult to train employees, and it is very difficult to improve a process if you do not have it clearly documented. You must understand it to improve it. Once we document our processes and our procedures, we must have the discipline to execute to the procedures, or if the procedures are not working, to change them. You should always do what you say you do. My last speed guideline is to make smart use of instructional technology. For example, the computer is a very important and valuable tool, but sometimes we lose sight that the computer is there only to help us. It is very easy to get overwhelmed with its technology. In a just-in-time environment, fast and efficient transfer of information and messages is vital. Just like everything else in our businesses, the computer should be used only as a tool. We need to be aware of the dangers of information overload. With the unlimited power of electronic telecommunications and computers, we now have the potential to generate and transfer unlimited amounts of information. A key, just-in-time question is how do we get the right information to the people that can do something with the information? We need to constantly ask the questions, what information do we really need, and how is it best captured and delivered to the people who can do something with the information? Technology should not be another roadblock preventing us from achieving speed. The words, "the system is forcing me to do this," or "I can't do this because of the system," are repeated over and over much too often in our businesses. Many of our information needs revolve around gathering data to support our measurements. We need to assure that the measurements we have established actually measure the right things that will drive the right behaviors. The measurement focus must be to support customers and to support just-in-time objectives. One good example on how we need to shift our measurement focus to customer needs is the way we typically handle performance to schedule measurements in our businesses. Every department has them in some form. In my opinion, all too many of these type measurements are much too internally focused, telling management how well the department is doing to internal commitments. For example, they will tell a manager when necessary inputs were received at their particular function, how much time it took to process the inputs through their function, and then when outputs actually left the function. No matter how well you think you are performing to your own internal measurements, the only measurement that really counts is what the customer thinks of your performance. Have you met the customer's deadline? In my opinion, all other performance to schedule measurements and schedule information add very little value. All performance to schedule measurements and information should be focused on the internal and external customers' needs. Never forget that this is the only performance measurement that counts. In this example, everyone in the organization needs to be pulling together with a common goal to meet the customer need date. Information and measurements should not be focused internally. We should never be satisfied to meet internal dates if they do not support the date we committed to the customer. The major just-in-time objectives should be common measurements for everyone in the organization. In a just-in-time environment, measurements should be focused on reducing inventory, improving quality, increasing process speed, and improving worker skill and flexibility, and creating self-managing teams. As you can see by now, considerable changes in our thinking and measures of performance are required as we move to just-in-time. With all of its potential benefits, it is staggering to see large numbers of managers not embracing these just-in-time concepts. The reason does not seem to be that they cannot see the wisdom of these changes. The reason seems to be their fear of loss of recognition and their fear of change. They are not sure how they will fit in this new environment. Let's face it, in this new environment, their roles will change significantly. Some of them will not be able to adjust and will not survive these changes. When you think about it, life is much easier and more comfortable with traditional approaches that allow us to insulate ourselves from waste and problems. At first, it is usually quite confusing for managers to understand how to go about these changes. Part of the confusion lies in the fact that in many cases, just-in-time requires us to unlearn much of what we've been taught and learn new approaches. Most of the changes are not difficult to learn, but they can be very difficult to implement. They require us to act and manage our organizations differently than we have in the past. The problem is not that just-in-time thinking is technologically difficult. The difficult aspect of just-in-time is it requires us to change. And this change process, once started, will continue for a long time. Also, commitment might include hiring trained external consultants in just-in-time or training key individuals within the organization to become just-in-time leaders. We cannot survive by being mere administrators that maintain the status quo. We must become bold leaders and continually identify constraints to higher speed. And we must empower employees closest to the work to think and act on problem solutions. Just-in-time thinking helps focus the collective minds of the organization on the highest priority constraints. Over time, these changes will add up to a basic transformation of a company. Just-in-time is not the answer to all of your problems, and is certainly not the only strategy you will need to learn to compete. But it is a fact that it is very unlikely that you will be able to survive long-term in the fierce, competitive global market without it. Thank you for this opportunity to share just-in-time thinking with you.
Now we are going to begin the second question and answer session. And to start it, we have a question coming via fax from Medellin, Colombia, the University AFIT. Okay, the question is, when you reduce inventories, what do you do with the staff that you have that is too much?
This is probably one of the difficult dilemmas that businesses have as they implement improvements. They find that they don't need the same number of people that they needed in the past. What many businesses are doing is forming what they call redeployment pools. And they take these excess people and try to put them to work on projects that have been long neglected in the business. Projects maybe to improve maintenance functions or engineering functions, and gradually, as the business needs the business turnover and people normally leave the business, these redeployment pools are absorbed into new jobs. This is a very difficult process to manage. So people must learn new skills and must be absorbed into jobs that people are leaving for normal turnover. But there will be periods where there will be surplus people, and we hope we can put these people to work on projects that have been in the past neglected and gradually absorb these people into real jobs as turnover and natural attrition happens in the business. The thing we do not want to do is we do not want to have to remove people from the workforce as a result of these productivity improvements. What happens then is that people then will become very, very reluctant to participate in the improvement process if they see that by participating and making contributions, the result is that they lose their job. So we must learn to redeploy these people and absorb them into new jobs as turnover and natural attrition happens in the business.
Lo normal de un negocio. Thank you. The next question that we have here comes by phone from Mexico, Petróleos Mexicanos, petroleum company. This is from Tabasco. Good morning. We are calling from the from administration division. The administration of a public enterprise is influenced by the economic policy of the government. Could the top management of these enterprises apply just-in-time concepts under being as they are under the influence of the policies of the government? And how can you simplify the work processes if you have certain laws and regulations that you have to respect? Thank you.
Well, it is a very interesting question, and when you think about the opportunities to eliminate waste, one of the great opportunities, I think we would all agree, are in our government bureaucracies and our government rules and procedures and our very, very bureaucratic hierarchies and complex rules and regulations that we have in many of our governments, not only, I'm sure, in Mexico, but very, very true in the United States. It's very interesting in the United States now that there are many books now that are really taking just-in-time concepts and applying them to the government systems and processes and bureaucracies. There is a very popular book now that is endorsed by President Clinton here in the United States, and he has charged all of his people to read this book on reinventing government. And if you read this book, you will find that what they are talking about are these basic just-in-time principles in terms of getting a process focus, a customer focus, eliminating waste, and doing this in a government environment. So there are certainly significant opportunities to improve our processes, to achieve speed, and to eliminate waste in our government bureaucracies. Again, the top government administrators and top government leaders need to recognize and accept these concepts, believe in them, and then learn how to apply these concepts into their government strategies and their approach to doing